Hello, everyone. Welcome back. Hope you enjoyed the episode the other day. It was Stay the Course. It was part 2 of the episode that we did with Rick Ferri, and it was just taking a look at basically thinking about your investments like a piece of cake with sprinkles, icing, candles, all the good stuff. But really what it was is it was a conversation about know thyself. And he made this great point. It was embedded in there, but I wanted to come back to it, that you really want to create this investor policy statement. And ideally, you would have done it when times were good, right? You would already had this locked down. You should be going to it. But it doesn't mean that that you can't start to cobble something together now if you've been kicked back on your heels. And so for those of you that are now taking this idea of an investor policy statement a little bit more seriously, I thought maybe what we could do is I could pull back the curtain. I could share with you a little bit of what mine looks like and kind of get Brad's take on it and kind of use it as an exploratory mission to help you figure out what yours might look like as well. So to help me with this, I have my co-host Brad here with me today. How you doing, buddy?
Hey, Jonathan, I am doing quite well. And yeah, I'm curious actually to hear your investor policy statement, because I think this is something we've talked about numerous times on the podcast, but I have to be honest and say I've never committed it to paper for myself. And I know you've been thinking about this and going through this exercise quite a bit recently. And I'm also curious how the interplay with those, the cake and the sprinkles work, right? Because I think you are kind of a shiny object syndrome kind of guy.
I am.
And even though, I think we'd love to believe that, small cap value or some other thing is like, time-tested actual research. But I think, like I said in the episode with Rick Ferri, it just sounds like kind of complicated stock picking in essence. And I'm curious, like, how this all ties together into your general investment thesis and this investor policy statement.
Yeah, it works 60% of the time, all the time. Okay, so let's see. As I was cobbling this together upon the advice that I've gotten from many people, including Physician on Fire, White Coat Investor wrote about this. This is something that a couple of our guests have talked about. I've been putting it together. It sounds like homework, but really it's just kind of objectively looking at your understanding of your financial situation, your goals, and mapping your plan out when you're in an unemotional place. And so I'm going to kind of lean heavily on my thought process here, but there's a few things that we'll talk about. We'll talk about our goals. We'll talk about our investments, our perception of home ownership, and then our spending and our giving. Those are kind of the things that make up the core of the investor policy statement. So let's talk about the goals. So obviously, like, if you guys remember back in 2017, when we started this podcast, I was aggressively paying down my student loans. If you remember, like, my story, I'm graduating pharmacy school with $168,000 in student loan debt, paying down my student loans, getting back to the place. There's this distinct point in time, and I realized, wow, I just made it back to broke. I've been in the education system for like 12 years now. Went through undergrad, went through pharmacy school, graduated, all the student loan debt, and then paid it off in 4 years. So now finally, in my late 20s, my net worth is zero again. Yes.
Oh, Jonathan, my favorite phrase in the world, back to broke, right?
I know. We've had actual fights about this offline.
A positive and a negative rolled into one sentence. But no, getting back to a $0 net worth is the way that I like to hear it phrased. So yeah, that's cool.
Happily phrased. So anyways, like, to pay off $168,000 of student loan debt, you have to have a pretty hefty savings rate. We were, at the time, our life cost in between $30,000 to $40,000 a year. That was pretty doable. And then we just maintained that savings rate. And we kind of talked, if you stayed with us and listened to a bunch of those early episodes, as of like episode 54, I talked about this inflection point where I made the choice to like walk away from my corporate job and just do Choose FI full time. It was a big deal, and very exciting to be able to do that. And so anyways, the frame for this now is that I am not a practicing pharmacist, and I don't play a pharmacist on the internet anymore either. It's just so I'm a full-time podcaster, and I get to talk about my favorite thing in the world, which is personal finance. And I tell you what, personal finance is very interesting right now in that the entire economy is so turbulent. So I wanted to kind of roll through my investor policy statement through the context of someone that has paid off all of their debt. They were build a small business. So I'm a small business owner. But that means variable income, and I'm saving for as long as possible, a significant portion of my income. But I'm clearly, as are most of us, affected by what's going on in the world.
So Jonathan, I guess let's start, and I'd love to hear you talk through this, like the definition of an investor policy statement, because, as I'm hearing you kind of describe this, in my mind's eye, it was conceptualized as something that truly has to do with just your type of investments, the amount that, maybe rebalancing or putting in certain amounts, or if the stock market drops X, I'd love to not do Y, which is essentially sell everything and run and, crawl under a bed, right? But as I'm hearing you describe it, you're saying about how I paid off my student loans, and I'm curious also how that factors in your mind's eye, because it sounds more like an overarching concept of your financial life.
Yeah, I'm sure it can be different things for different people. I'm sharing mine, and I give myself permission to change mine over the years as I get more information, So I could see this is like a beta version that I think is minimum viable for my life. But I think what it does is that it's going to dictate your financial plan. It's with your understanding and what your goals are. What would you like to do in ideal scenarios, and how will you respond in negative scenarios? And there are many people that have very, very complicated investment plans. Mine is not one of them. The simplicity will come through very, very quickly. But I thought we could just start with kind of my understanding of my lay of the land. So, we have strived ever since working as a pharmacist all the way through. We've strived to save 30 to 50% of our income as a family. That's what allowed us to pay off our debt so quickly. And on the other end of that, building a business, you don't have quite as much control over what it looks like, but we've tried to maintain that mentality on the other side. Our life, just in terms of what our life cost, in the absence of student loan debt, our life, and life is lumpy, but our life generally averages somewhere in between $3,500 all the way up to, on the higher end, probably $5,000 a month. That's kind of where our monthly expenses kind of run for us here in Richmond, Virginia. We have a very nice, very comfortable lifestyle, especially at the upper end. Nobody's feeling the pinch. That works for us. And so using what we know about financial independence and calculating your number, I calculated my number around roughly that, that $5,000 a month category. And so for me, the goal for us, and Brad, how would someone calculate their financial independence number if their monthly expenses are $5,000 a month?
Yeah. So the rough back of the envelope calculation is you get your yearly expenses. So I guess you're right, Jonathan. Most people think about this in terms of their monthly expenses, right? Because you think about, what are my credit card bills? What's my mortgage? What are my utilities? Those things. Just add them all together and then multiply by 12 for the 12 months of the year. So you get your annual expenses there. And then the rough calculation for the financial independence number is take 25 times your annual expenses. So in Jonathan's case, if he's saying even on the upper end, it's always better to be conservative with this stuff, is $5,000 a month. You would multiply that by 12, which gets you to $60,000 in annual expenses, and then multiply that annual expense number by 25. Now, in this case, 60,000 times 25 is $1.5 million. So Jonathan's very loose financial independence number would be $1.5 million.
Yeah. And so our FI number that I'm kind of calculating in terms of we're here is somewhere between 1.3 and $1.5 million. That's kind of just in my mind, that's kind of what I'm targeting. And then an obscene kind of fat five for us would be about $2 million. There is, if we had $2 million, that would provide plenty of room for any sort of buffer that we might not account for, but it's just kind of somewhere in that range of my target. I'm not shooting for 12 million. It's just, this is kind of the range, right?
Right. And to give some flavor to that 2 million, the upper end range there is Big Earn. When we've had him on numerous times from Early Retirement Now, he's talked about, and he's run every type of scenario, even black swan type events like we're going through now. And he pretty much has said a 3.25% safe withdrawal rate is going to get you through essentially every single possible scenario. So if you're talking 2 million is your fat fi upper end, and your yearly expenses are about 60,000, that's a 3% withdrawal, right? Because 2 million times 3% is 60,000. So yeah, I mean, even under the blackest of black swans, which is probably maybe what we're going through right now, I think even Big Earn would agree that that's a pretty safe number. So it's just important that everybody just has a sense. We talk about this 4% rule and the inverse of that, the 25 times. But if you're ultra conservative with your money and want to go with 3% or 3.25%, that's going to work in pretty much every single scenario that Big Earn has modeled out.
So when I do kind of my modeling, my forecasting, and my hopes and dreams for our family, our goals, these are our goals. What can we do to reach our goals? My goal for our family is to reach a net worth of $1.5 million by the age of 45 and to have hit that $2 million number by the age of 50. This is a goal. We're going to work towards the goal. We're going to increase our income. We're going to maintain our expenses or try to decrease them. This is the goal. And our other goals is that we will have no other consumer debt other than our mortgage. And before we draw down on our net worth, we will pay off our mortgage. Now, this is actually a really important distinction because the mortgage is a pretty significant portion of our monthly expenses, as you might expect. And so that actually adds another layer of little nuance to your own particular policy statement. You could adjust your numbers up or down by recognizing the fact that, okay, while your mortgage is going to go disappear, that's going to obviously decrease your expenses. I'm okay with leaving that buffer in and not accounting for it. Maybe something else is more expensive that I haven't accounted for, like, college for the kids, like healthcare expenses, something that I haven't factored in. But that's just a buffer room. I'm anticipating paying off our mortgage before we're drawing down on our net worth. So, all right, that's the first section. That's our goals. Now, the second section of this is the investment section. And before we talk about like our actual investments in the market, I think we should spend a few minutes talking about the emergency fund. And Brad, I know this is something that in the past we've had pretty significant conversations on, and I will just be the first to say that your emergency fund, either as a percentage or as a total dollar amount, has always been higher than mine. And how conservative you are with that emergency fund is you're also more conservative than mine as well. And maybe that's your background as an accountant. Maybe it's your own personality traits. Maybe it's the fact that you lived through 2008 as an investor. But for all of those reasons, I know that you place a lot more emphasis on that robust emergency fund than I do.
Yeah, I think you hit it on the head there. I think it is probably innate personality trait, honestly. I think it's just knowing my own brain and how we set these policies in good times, understanding that the psychology is really powerful in times of fear, right? In times like these, frankly, where you don't know what's going on. And that fear of the unknown is frightening, and it can often lead you to freak out and do things that you, under wiser times or under calmer times, you would not even contemplate doing. So what I've done to head that off, because I suspect, even though we talk about this quite often, I suspect I would be susceptible to that. And I'm pretty certain I'd be susceptible to it. So what I've done to kind of mitigate that, and it's always know thyself, right? But to mitigate that is have a more significant emergency fund than I probably should, right? And should is a very loose term. And I say that kind of jokingly, Jonathan, because like we've always talked about in this podcast, this is very personal. Personal finance is truly personal. There's no dogma. And you might get people who mathematically would say, oh, Brad, you've been stupid all this time. You've been keeping 8+ months of emergency fund just sitting around in cash, essentially earning nothing, earning, maybe 1.75% in your CIT bank account or something like that. Look at the opportunity cost, right? Look at what you gave up, which would have been investing that money in the stock market all this time. And I don't doubt for 1 second that my net worth would be higher had I invested that. I know that. But again, know thyself. I need to sleep well at night. And in order to do that, I need to have a significant amount of cash lying around that I can access really at a moment's notice. And again, I know it's stupid mathematically, or it has been, but it does make me sleep better at night, I have to say.
Yeah, well, maybe it's been stupid for the last 10 years, stupid with air quotes around it. It doesn't look or feel stupid right now with the pandemic and the markets contracting and a lot of uncertainty about where the markets are going. And I think that's the point. So I'm on the other end of this, and just to kind of like radical transparency to walk through what that might look like, let me just share a little bit about how what my emergency fund looks like. Keeping in mind, this is not coming from like the lap of luxury where like, you know what I mean? Like you're still on the path to financial independence. You're following the principles, but you're making the best guess that you can with the information that you have at hand. So let me just share with you kind of like my a little bit more aggressive version and kind of where I'm standing with that. So for myself and my family, we keep 1 to 2 months of expenses in a local bank account. So that's really, we're just talking about cash flow here. So with our expenses running anywhere from, $3,500 all the way up to like $5,000, we keep somewhere in that $6,000 to $7,000 range in our local bank account for access. I notice I'm not talking about cash here. Like I don't feel the need to have $7,000 and $100 bills sitting underneath my mattress. Even now, for those of you that are, we do use a fiat currency, which means the entire currency is dependent on faith in the government. So for what it's worth, my money isn't all in a bank. In fact, I don't think anybody would even want to touch my cash right now. It's like it's dirty money, germs, right? Germs. Sidebar. But anyways, we keep 1 to 2 months in our local check. This is cash flow. This is so I don't have to worry about overdrafts. I don't have to worry about anything month to month. We keep a remaining 3 to 6 months of expenses in a high yield savings account. Brad, I know you mentioned CIT Bank, so that's where I keep mine as well. And let me just tell you though, like that 3 to 6 months in my investor policy statement, I'm a little bit more aggressive. So basically what I say is I 3 months stays in the high yield savings account and the other 3 months of expenses can be in the market. But I give myself permission in my investor policy statement. If I ever get freaked out or concerned about the economics, I give myself permission to sell enough to bring that out of the market, whether it's at a gain or at a loss, whatever it is, to bring that out at any time. And so 90+% of the time, that will, kind of work to my favor because it's just time in the market as opposed to timing, but it might not. And I will actually say in this case, when I kind of was like, let me make sure that emergency fund is buffer, I did not sell at the all-time high, right? I did not lock in the greatest return. But what I'm doing here is, and it'll make more sense in a second, I'm just kind of conditioning myself. If the fear kicks in for some reason, the uncertainty kicks in for any reason, these are the conditions of what you are allowed to sell out of panic. You can't go out of this. This is the point. It's to create a safety box for yourself when times are good. So you're not going to go check your personal capital account and see your entire net worth has gone down by 25% and say, oh, I need to get everything out of the market. No. Your ability to freak out is confined to 3 months of expenses, basically.
Yeah, that's cool. I like that a lot. So, right, clearly you're not saying that you only have 3 months of expenses in your investment account. Since you have your entire lump amount in your taxable investments, let's say, at Vanguard or Schwab or Fidelity or M1, wherever it may reside. And of that pot of money, however big or small it may be, in this policy statement, you give yourself the ability to sell up to 3 months or thereabouts of your monthly expenses. Am I hearing you right?
Yes, that is accurate. That is accurate. So let's talk about how that kind of maps out then. So for our investor policy statement, now that we've kind of covered the emergency fund, so no consumer debt, the only debt we have is our mortgage. We've got this emergency fund that it has, 3 to 6 months at any given time in a high yield savings account. And depending on what the balance is in there, up to an additional 3 months just in the market. And then from there, for our actual investing strategy, all of our 401ks, our IRAs, our Roth IRAs, whatever, all of our retirements and tax advantage accounts are just at the provider that there happens to be a reason that we're using them. For instance, with ChooseFI for our 401k, we use Schwab. With our HSA that we have, that happens to go through Fidelity. With my old employer, and in fact, with our Roth IRAs that we set up back in the day, those are all through Vanguard. Happen to be at all of them. All of them are just in the mutual funds, the 100%, all in index funds, the total stock market index funds for the respective providers. Don't look at it. Don't question it. We're 100% equities. And I'm fine with that. Like even when the market's going down, I don't care. I don't look at it. I'm not going to be relying or drawing on this money in any way. My horizon is, well beyond 10 years. Remember, I have a 10-year plan minimum, right? So I need this to work for me. And I believe when I look at this 10 years from now, it's going to be worth more than it is today. I'm not questioning it. So the remainder of our investments, we actually invest in our taxable accounts. I've been using M1 for the last 2 or so years, ever since I was introduced to it. And this is a commission-free platform. It is to some degree a robo-advisor, but it's pretty lightweight. It allows you to set your allocations and then dollar cost average into those. This is what I use for our taxable investments. And in this taxable investment, these are the allocations that we've come up with. So 75%, again, is just, and this is for us. Please do not take this as me prescribing to you exactly what allocation to use. I'm just saying that for us, this is what we came up with, and this is what we have written down in our investor policy statement. 75% is just in like a ETF like VTI, which for many people, if you're not hearing that before, that is just the ETF version of VTSAX. You can get that commission-free, no cost at the M1 Finance platform. And that's 75% is in that. I have 15% reserved for, it's actually, what's funny, we were talking about on this past episode with Rick Ferry, it's Paul Merriman's ultimate buy and hold portfolio. And what Paul Merriman basically said is that VTI, just like the market, is cap weighted. And Paul Merriman advocates tilting towards small cap value specifically, but also emerging markets, international, et cetera. And so he just kind of divides up, he tilts towards those other factors as opposed to all of it being just in a total stock market index fund. And then I actually reserve inside of M1 because it's commission-free trading. And again, we're only talking about inside of M1. I reserve, I think it's roughly 6 to 10% for individual stocks, individual companies that I get excited about or that I use personally or that I think have, pretty cool growth potential. What's really cool about M1 is that it actually preserves my asset allocation. So it's so easy when you start talking about individual companies to want to chase returns. You see that one company had 100% returns last year and you're like, well, let's double down on that. But with M1, what's great about it is that you just tell it what the allocation you want to be is. So if you want to be, in my case, I just said 75% VTI, 15% in this kind of ultimate buy and hold status, and then an additional, 6 to 10% in individual stocks. Again, this is your own investor policy statement. I'm just sharing mine. M1 will make sure that whatever new money I throw at that account, it will make sure that it keeps my asset allocation in line. So if some hot stock just blew up last year, you won't keep throwing your new money after the one that did great last year just because it did great last year, right? And that's kind of a way of getting your emotion outside of it. And so that's what we have laid out. This is not for us. Again, this is a super simple one. Maybe in coming years, we'll look back at this and say, you know what, maybe we want to add some cake, maybe we want to add some icing, maybe we want to add some candles, maybe we want to throw a little bit more international in there, a little bit more emerging markets. My wife and I will have a conversation about that, but we're not making changes to that plan right now.
Right. And I think that's the important part, is that this is basically a psychological tool to keep yourself from doing something stupid during times of great stress. And there's huge value there. And, obviously you said, and you put a bunch of caveats in that this is your plan. This is not anybody else's. This is not ChooseFI's advice by any means. This is just how you have done it. And more importantly, how you think through it. I think that's the critical part. And really it's so, you have set something up so you continue to invest. You have this set plan, these set percentages, and that's what you've decided. And you also have an understanding that this is a long time horizon, right? You said minimum 10 years, probably up to a 70-year time horizon based on your age, right? This is not something that you're worried about this quarter, no matter how terrible this quarter has been, or no matter how great the quarter was 1 or 2 quarters ago, right? Because we've literally seen these side by side in terms of an amazing year in 2019. And then obviously Q1 2020 has been pretty horrific by any measure. So it's not down to that. It's not down to picking the hot stock. It's not down to trying to time this selling and buying. This is a statement that you've set up for a 50 to 70 year time horizon. And I think that when you take that step back, that makes this entire exercise a lot more impactful, frankly, because that is what you're thinking about. You're thinking about your family's wealth and potentially multi-generation wealth, not, wow, the sky is falling right now. And frankly, for a lot of us, it feels like the sky is falling. But if you've studied history, if you've studied the stock market, this kind of sky is falling thing happens pretty often, right? And it's hard to see through that. It's hard to see through that during the stress of it. And I think that is the great benefit of having a statement like this in existence, actually on paper. And I say that sheepishly because I do not have one, but it's important. And Jonathan, thank you for talking us through it.
Well, you want to hear some more?
I don't. I think I just closed the episode.
You did. You closed the episode. So I am 100% equities. And I am 100%, like if you heard everything that I just mentioned there, all of those are equities, which means I am exposed to a lot more volatility than someone that has a large, if you remember Rick Ferry's episode talking about the cake is your stocks, your equities, and it's your fixed income. So fixed income, as he defined, CDs, savings accounts, bonds, treasuries. These would be fixed income. They're not as volatile. I am I'm all in on volatility right now. But I'm all in on volatility because my working timeline is about another 10 plus years or so, 10 to 15 years. I'll probably be, actively working and attempting to produce income and save additional income. If I determine at a point in time that, okay, I'm 5 years out, I'm walking away from my income within the next 5 years, in my investor policy statement, it addresses how I will move towards increased levels of fixed income. For me, right now, I have in there, it's 70% equities, 30% bonds. I'm still a long ways out from needing this, but I do not plan on going into retirement and drawing down on this money from a position of 100% equities. If you have double or triple or quadruple the amount that you need, maybe you're like, hey, let's just roll the dice. Why not? But I would fully anticipate that when I'm within 5 years of actively needing the money, I will be increasingly moving to a much more conservative position. It'll probably look like a 70-30 or a 60-40 possibly. In my mind, I'm keeping in mind the fact that I plan on paying off the mortgage. So, and for me, paying off the mortgage, that is a fixed income play. You're reducing your mandatory expenses dramatically. So for me, 70-30 right now with the benefit of this being 10 plus years away feels about right. But that's in my investor policy statement. My wife and I, based on the experience over the next couple of years, can sit down when times are good and address whether or not that's going to be higher or lower. This is a great opportunity now to kind of see how you feel when it's hitting the fan, right? If you feel like nothing but confidence, it kind of tells you something about your risk tolerance. If you're having trouble sleeping at night and you're always thinking about your investments, then that's giving you some more information about when you are actually drawing down your money, what you're going to feel. You never want to go to a panicked place. So for us, that's kind of what we have written down, but I'm sleeping just fine. And here's my strategy for why I feel okay with 100% equities at the moment. My confidence is predicated on two things. I have 6 months of expenses set aside in a high yield savings account. I have 1, to 2 months of cash flow now. So here's the plan, because I'm in Brad, you're in this business with me, so you understand, but I'm a small business owner. The market's volatile. The economy is volatile, and there's going to be an impact certainly on small businesses, certainly has been and will be on ours as well. And so what will happen is, well, should I just stay out of the market? Should I just avoid it entirely? Well, it's kind of twofold. Since I'm 6 months out, I can kind of project out my income each additional month, right? And as long as you don't have to dip into your emergency savings, then you can consider, to whatever degree that you're able, making small contributions into the market as you can. But if it dries up to the point where you're having to move stuff out of your emergency savings into your cash flow account, well, that's giving you great information, and it's giving you great information 6 months out that you can't do that anymore. So that's kind of like the mentality. By having that 6 month buffer, it allows me to be comfortable with 100% equities right now. And there's a couple other things that I have in my toolbox, my levers, if you will, that I'm just keeping in mind. When my wife and I did our burn rate, like our worst case scenario, what would happen if our business didn't produce another dollar, if we had to tap into our investments, even at a decreased amount, like how long could we make it? We ran that what is the worst that can happen scenario. And it was several years, right? It was several years before everything just totally fell apart. And with that in mind, that's only one of the alternatives. The other is that, keep in mind, if you're young, you're doing this in your mid-30s, you've built skills, you've built a business, like you probably could go back to work if you needed to. So I'm a pharmacist. I could go back to work as a pharmacist. I've built a considerable number of skills in the time that I've been working on Choose FI. I could go, if I wanted to, I could pivot into any number of industries with that skill set in a worst case scenario. Now, these are very unlikely scenarios in my mind, but they could happen. And even in the worst possible case scenario, which is where I don't earn another dollar for the next year and a half or 2 years, with the alternatives that I have in mind that are reasonable and viable, I don't see a scenario where it's going to be a total disaster. I can tolerate the risk of 100% equities. I think I can outlast this thing. I think I can outlast this current market environment. And because I'm thinking with a 10-year plus mindset on my investments, you check in with me in a year, I guess, Brad, right? Like check in with me in the year 2021 or 2022 and see if I still have the same confidence. But right now, I feel really good about 100% equities.
Yeah, I like that. I also like the kind of, I don't know if you'd say the canary in the coal mine type way of looking at this, that you have that 6 months of runway And obviously, like you said, in absolute dire circumstances, multiple years. And I mean, clearly, if it came to that, you can pivot, right, in any number of ways, right? And I think that is kind of one of the hallmarks of FI thinking is flexibility and understanding the world as it is, right? Not how you want it to be. So is there a scenario, hypothetical, and I'm not implying this, but is there a scenario where you sell your house and you move to a lower cost living arrangement, right? And not you generally, but or let me say not you specifically, but one generally. Like, would that cut down a lot of expense? Would that lower that number that you had to pay off that mortgage? Obviously it would. In your particular case, like you said, you are a pharmacist, which is a very marketable skill. Aside from all the marketable skills that you've picked up here, could you have a side hustle? Could you go back to working at a retail pharmacy even for a day or two a week? Like, I mean, again, flexibility. Is that something that you would want to do? No, obviously. Like, there's no world where Jonathan from ChooseFI would want to go back and be a pharmacist now. But clearly, if it came down to feeding your family or paying for your bills, of course you do that, right? Like, that's just, you have to know the world as it is. And having that flexibility of, okay, I have at least 6 months and maybe 3 to 5 years of runway to figure this out, I think there's probably a 99.99999% chance of success. And I think that's the best that we can kind of hope for is you have to be flexible. You have to take the world as it is, and you plan in good times and you have options in bad times. That's a pretty succinct way of putting it,
Yeah. No, I mean, that really is it. It's not really fun for me to kind of share these like worst case scenarios with anybody. These are the kind of things that it's a lot easier just to kind of, I've mentally run through them. I feel very comfortable with the odds. I think of this like a bet. I think the odds are in my favor that this is going to be the best path for us. And when I run through the scenario and it's kind of just looking through the variables of what you can control, I'm like, okay, you're in pretty good shape. I mean, you compare and contrast this with someone, and this is not a slight, it's just a reality. Like, if someone is in a similar situation to mine, but they're 65 years old, 75 years old, maybe going and getting that job isn't going to be as likely. Maybe there's not as much flexibility that can be had. And so know thyself. I'm literally just sharing, the vulnerability and the transparency that comes with this conversation. I'm just sharing it so you have a chance to iterate this for your own life, because you know your life better than someone listening to this. And if you're like, well, I don't have as much flexibility. I don't have as much ways that if I needed to, I could turn on this income. Great. I mean, in the sense that that, so you can't tolerate as much risk. And so I think these things like this idea, this investor policy statement can seem kind of academic. It could sound like homework. It could sound boring. Like, I don't want to do that. That sounds like an assignment. It's not to be an assignment. It's so that you can, from a good place, take a look at the levers that you have available, the flexibility that you have available to you, and come up with a strategy that will serve you. And right now, mine is serving me. I guess the last thing that I would just add on to this is like your investor policy statement. Give yourself permission to update it, iterate it once you have new information. Do that with your spouse or partner. That way you are both signing off on it and making sure that you're on the same page. So the last section that we put on here is our spending and giving section. And in this, we talk about big purchases that we're going to be saving up for, things that we want to do, where those fall in the priorities, especially if times are bad, what gets cut. And then the charities that we support, kind of through thick or thin. And we have a couple that we do just on a local basis, but kind of as a recurring bill section. We have our church that we support, through monthly tithes. And then we also support the ChooseFI International Foundation, which is, something that you and I have been advocating for basically since this thing started, to take financial literacy and make it available for everyone. So those are kind of like, that's something that we built into our cadence. And we talk about, as long as this criteria is met, those contributions stay, and you kind of just have an understanding for what you want the impact to be when you can, and what are the criteria when you recognize you simply can't, and put those in there as well. That's it, man. It's not like this isn't a homework assignment. It's just kind of like, this is just what we do. And it was kind of cool as I was crafting this, and then take it to my wife and have this conversation with her and get her buy-in. And there was a sense of kind of like, oh, cool. Well, this is why we're doing that. This is why we're investing this way. This is what the plan is. And this is kind of part of we talk about the legacy binder in past episodes. This is part of your legacy, right? I mean, it all makes sense to you with your lizard brain and your Excel spreadsheets, but what about your partner? Do they know what your plan is? Do they know how your insurance fits into this if one of you were to pass away? You know, what the role would be? And so for me, the insurance would be just, that's going in a different direction. We've talked about it, but these are the components that make up your investor policy statement.
Yeah. And I think it is important, and it is not homework, like you said. And, you know, a lot of this is to safeguard your family. And like you talked about with the emergency binder, I went through that again recently and even just updated it for Laura of, you know, who are people that you need to get in touch with, just something like that, like things that are in my brain. But if I'm not there, then she clearly needs that information, even down to just contacts at the bank or with the insurance company on our rental properties, things like that. Like, these are really important exercises. They're not, like Jonathan said, they're not homework. They're not there to be busy work. This is to safeguard your family in times that you need them. And in the case of the policy statement, it's really to safeguard yourself against yourself in times when fear takes over. So, I mean, I think this is critical. And, you know, obviously we're talking about this in a period of fear, but if you haven't taken the time to do this, just sit down, really listen to this episode again and think through like just the conceptual framework with which we approached it. And I think it's going to really benefit you in your life.
Hey everyone, hope you enjoyed this episode and got value from kind of how I put together my own financial plan. I know there were some resources that we mentioned. If you go to choosefi.com, the homepage, and there's actually a toolbox called the Financial Resilience Toolkit that has all the resources that we mentioned. You can also go specifically in the case of M1 Finance, which is the robo-advisor that I use to do all of my buy and hold investing for my taxable accounts. If you want to get a more comprehensive review on exactly why I get so excited about it and why I've been using it for the last couple of years, and why I think it would likely be a great fit for you as well, you can just go to choosefi.com/M1 for a comprehensive review of all of its features. All right. Hope that helps. And we will see you tomorrow. Same Fi time, same Fi channel. No, nothing. Not even a courtesy laugh. I thought it was good. All right. We'll see you tomorrow, everyone.